Welcome to In Substantia. I am Gabor Farkas. Today, I am speaking with Arthur Keller, a systems thinker whose work helps people see the bigger picture behind today's crisis. Trained as an engineer, he became a consultant, a teacher, and a writer, asking us to think systemically, to look beyond the problems in front of us, and to understand the interconnections that create them. We'll explore Arthur's journey, the lessons of the SDGs, and what he calls the Great Simplification. We'll talk about resilience, imagination, and what it means to live well in a world that feels increasingly fragile. Arthur,
Hi.
to begin, you trained as an engineer. What moments led you from solving technical problems to questioning how societies and systems function as a whole?
Right. Just one thing before we get started. In your presentation, you said that I call it the Great Simplification. I just want to make clear that it's not my expression. I sometimes, not very often, by the way, but regularly use it, Great Simplification. But I'm not the one who came up with it. From my understanding, it was coined by Nate Hagens. And he's the one who calls it the Great Simplification, which I pretty much agree with, by the way.
Thanks for the clarification. Credit to Nate Higgins then for the phrase.
Yeah.
I'm sure we will talk about that extensively during our talk.
Moments or experiences, you said. It's been a long journey, and it's not gonna. It's not as simple, and it's not a. I would say a linear journey. So anyway, at the beginning, I was trained as an engineer. That's my initial training, and I did learn how to solve specific problems and come up with more or less creative. There was not that much creativity in the process. It was mainly, using the tools you've learned, and it's useful, for many things. But then I was lucky, so to speak. I was lucky because during my training as an engineer, I learned about systems dynamics, and I kind of enjoyed that. But systems dynamics, from my perspective, it was just physics and maths and computer science. But I used it to model some systems. But obviously, they were very simple systems at the beginning, very specific systems. I remember modeling some objects. I remember modeling some fluids, the flow of some liquids or gases. That was, very simple things just to understand how system dynamics worked. And then I graduated, and I moved on to real life, to so to speak, and I worked in different fields for years.
Arthur, what was the first moment when systems dynamics felt like more than math? The first time it changed how you saw a real problem?
I wanted to solve big problems, societal problems. I was very much into societal issues and ecological issues for a long time, and I felt that was where I needed to be and to work. And I didn't find that. I besides my work as a consultant or also as a sales manager, I did both at the same time. So it was a big stretch. But anyway, at the same time, I felt I was not at the right place. So I tried to work on specific projects that made sense to me, that were meaningful. I tried also, I worked a lot with NGOs and different organizations, think tanks involved in the topics I was interested in, the big picture. But it didn't work. It didn't really work that much because everywhere I went, uh, I was working with or facing very clever people many times. But those clever people, they were not clever in the way they understood the problems. It was very simplistic, very reductionist. They took complex problems, not complex problems, sorry, complicated problems, complicated issues, and then they used to break those issues down into simpler issues and simpler problems to solve. But most of the times, the engineers, they don't question the questions they're asked. They're asked to solve a specific
Mm.
problem.
Let's just pause a second here. How or when did you understand the difference between what is complicated and what is complex? What concrete example could you give where a fix in one silo made another domain worse?
So all this, I'm telling you this now in 2025 with my words today. But at that time, we were in 2005, 6, 7, 8. At that time, I didn't have the proper words, the proper knowledge, and the proper tools. And I felt it was more of an intuition to me that we were wrong and we were doing things wrong. And whenever we solved a problem, we somehow aggravated something else elsewhere. We made something else, more serious, another problem, another issue. Either we created other issues or we made them worse. Anyway, so it didn't work. I didn't know what to do because the conversations that I had at that time were very frustrating. I lacked the intellectual tools to actually explain what I was feeling. So I went back to dynamics, to systems dynamics, and then in 2009, 10, I discovered systemic thinking, systems thinking, for real. It's not just systems dynamics. That gave me a number of tools that I used in the next years. But then there's systems thinking, and there are many different authors and thinkers that, yeah, played a part in my upbringing. I would say overall that my the ones who played the most important roles are Donella or Dana and Dennis Meadows. They're not the only ones. There are many others which are really, really good. And I read many things, but what I understood is that, and I'm almost done answering your question, by the way. What I understood is that it's not about knowing what system dynamics or systems thinking is. It's about doing it. It's about practicing. Because if you don't, it's not intuitive.
Mm.
It's counterintuitive in many respects.
Yes, I also realized that practices matters more than slogans. It teaches you things you can't learn any other way. You often say that models teach humility. What did you get wrong early on that taught you that lesson?
So it's a lot of readings, and yeah, thinkers and authors. There were some, but then it's also about encounters and a lot of work and mistakes and trying to correct oneself. And after a while, and it's really the last part of my answer. After a while, you realize that you have to let go. It's about letting go of many things, and the main idea you have to let go is that you control the world. I mean, you can have control on a small system, like, something, an object, whatever it is. You can control it pretty much, but you don't control the world. You don't control the dynamics of very complex dynamic systems. They have their own logic, and all you can do is try to influence to some extent and move along and anticipate. But you can't change very easily a very, very complex system. So you need to let go. Yeah.
I guess the paradox is clear. The work breeds humility, but from the outside, I suppose it can look like posture. Let's talk about the application of all this. Once you started engaging with bigger systems, you inevitably met the people and institutions trying to manage them. When you first began working with those institutions and elected officials, what did you discover about the gap between technical solutions and political realities?
Okay. So I did work with many elected officials, but not on a national level. Very hardly ever. The elected officials I worked with were at the local level. In France, we have well, communities and towns and cities as everywhere else, but we have what we call département and then région, which are administrative denominations for territories, and I worked at that level. And so there's no rule. I mean, the the amount and the quality, the extent, I would say, of the knowledge of the people I work with is very broad, very broad. There's no general rule. But what I would say is that even even the most engaged people I work with, elected officials, the ones who understood that the issues we're going to talk about, societal issues and issues related to how social ecological systems work, meaning societies depending and interacting with the natural world. People who understand that it's important. There are very, 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 very few who actually understand the basics of systems thinking. Who So they understand that it's a complex situation. They understand we have problems, we have challenges, and that it's systemic. They say it's systemic, but they don't understand what it means. Many people who use the word systemic, they don't understand what it means because they haven't actually. Most of them, they haven't worked or they haven't developed a knowledge and experience of systems thinking. So when they say it's systemic, they just mean it you know, it's pretty much, it concerns many different parts, if not all the parts of the system. That's what they mean. It's multidimensional. Okay, but multidimensional is one thing. Systemic is another thing. Systems thinking is about not the different dimensions of the problem, but how they interact with each other, and that's completely different. It's the interaction. It's the interfaces between issues, and when you develop systems thinking, you do not think in terms of problems and solutions, because solutions have their own problems most of the time. So it's not that simple. You don't talk about cause and consequence, because most consequences retroact, have feedback loops which act upon the causes, and so it's not that simple. It's a lot of how you model. And when I say model, it's not about equations and math and physics necessarily. It can be a way of understanding what has an influence on what. But at one point, you have to take a pen and a paper and to draw something, even if you have no equations between, and you understand what has an influence on what. And when you do that, you stop thinking problem solution. Now, there's a metaphor that I use very often, uh, that I've developed a few years ago. It's not a very joyful metaphor, but it has I think it captures the main problem with problem solving itself. So the metaphor is this one. Imagine you go to well, you have several problems, medical problems. You have headaches, you know, persistent headaches. You have skin problems, and you also have digestive issues. Okay, so what do most people do? Well, they try to find solutions to these problems. So for the headaches, you don't necessarily need to go to the doctors. You have paracetamol, ibuprofen, ibuprofen. Yeah, well, I hope. Yeah, because yeah, okay. And then for the skin, no, it's just for pain. Oh, whatever. For a skin problem, you go to a specialist, a skin specialist, dermatologist, and they will tell you this is the cream that you need, for example. And then you go see another specialist for your belly problems, and it tells you, okay, for your digestive issues, this is another solutions that you have. It may take different forms. That could be herbal tea, for example. This is a great herbal tea for you, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so you have three problems and three solutions. So that's it, right? It's settled. You're going to do fine. You don't have to, put yourself into question. You can live, your life normally with those few adjustments. Now, imagine that those are not problems, but symptoms of the fact that you have generalized cancer, meaning a systemic problem, a systemic issue with your body. Now, you need to understand the systemic nature of the problem to understand that solving it would require a strategy that has nothing to do, and that's the important part, nothing to do with all the different solutions to all the different symptoms. You do not cure a generalized cancer with paracetamol and cream and herbal tea. You can have the three, but it's not going to do anything for your cancer. So that's the thing that most people have not understood, is that we have many, many specialists and scientists who are really good and work on specific problems. And so we have a problem with the climate, we have a problem with biodiversity, we have a problem with water, we have a problem. It's not just ecological problems.
Which is to say, we can stack fixes without touching the disease.
Now, what are the solutions? Always the same question. Oh, the solutions are, okay, so imagine that we did everything all the good specialists tell us to do about all the different problems. We would have paracetamol, cream, and herbal tea. And the cancer would still be there. Because we do not change the underlying system in the way it actually works. So anyway, now to answer your question, no elected official has understood that. So the discrepancy, to answer your question, the discrepancy between the actual solutions that we would need, or strategies we would need, and the political realities, is that you never find anyone anywhere who actually has a proper understanding of the systemic dimension, systemic nature of things, of the problems. Therefore, the strategies and solutions that are proposed are important. I'm not saying it's not important to actually tackle the different symptoms of the problem. It is very important. Okay, tackling climate change, for example, is vital. Biodiversity loss, or let's say collapse, we would need to react. It's vital. But if you just treat every symptom in its own silo, you're not going to treat the disease, and sometimes you may solve for some time some issues while aggravating others, but that's it. So we would need a profound systemic change, but the tools to do that do not exist today within the political realm. Political appointees, they have the ability to change many things within the system. They can't change the system. Okay, if a dictator takes control of a nation, he may, or she may, why not, change that system. Okay, you may change a whole society, a whole nation, but you won't change the world. And we're dealing with planetary issues right now. So even if that's in some place, some dictator, bad or good, let's imagine we have a benevolent, good dictator, which probably is a notion that doesn't and will never exist. But anyway, imagine we have that. And imagine that person changes his system, the system he has control over, changes for the best. Imagine that. Wow, that would be great, right? Even that, it's not going to change the system. It's not going to change the whole worldwide economy and the dynamics that come with it, and which embark almost all human activities on Earth. So it's not going to be enough. So we would need to change the system on a planetary level, which obviously will never happen.
Yeah, I resist asking you how you would go about it if you were that benevolent dictator. Maybe I'll do so at the end. And about what you said on politicians, I'm not sure I fully agree. Some of them do see the need for a systemic change, but they're elected for short terms, and anything that takes time costs money or disrupts daily life, and it's politically risky. If the results aren't immediate, or if people have to change how they live and behave, they're unlikely to get reelected. So instead of going for real systemic change, they go for short-term actions. they can point to and say, look, I did this, it worked. It's understandable, but it traps them in a cycle that keeps the deeper issues untouched.
There are many. Okay, I understand. There are many reasons for an elected official to actually not work on systems change, even if they understand or. But and what you're talking about is one very recurrent reason. It's probably not the only one, but anyway, what I'm saying is that in the political sphere, the right levers that we have are not levers to actually make systemic change um, happen. They're not the right levels. They're sometimes in the Palo Alto school of thought. They say level one or change, and level two change, and level one is changes within the system, and the people who govern, they have power on that category of lever. They can change many things within the system, but then they have no level two levers to change the actual system itself, its organizing principles.
Sorry, Arthur, apparently it's not so easy to interact with politicians at any level, is it?
As I said before, I do not work with elected officials on a national or international level. I've had conversations with some of them here and there, but I'm not used to working with them, and I'm not in that field, in that network. But I've been working with many people who are there, who work with politicians, or who work in that sphere. And every time I meet someone at the end of one of my conferences, for example, I give a speech, I give a keynote speech, and someone comes and talks to me, and then I realize that this person works at a political level somehow, or with the political sphere, and so that person is supposed to have understood the systemic problems that we face, because that person just happened to attend one of my speeches. So I asked them, who understands in the political sphere? And the answer is always the same: absolutely no one. The answer is always the same: they don't understand shit about these things. So okay, so they know we have a problem with climate. Most of them know and acknowledge that. Okay, we have a problem with climate. It's a big problem. They say it's a systemic problem. It is, but it's an under problem still. The climate system is a subsystem of the actual system you have to encompass and to have to consider to understand the whole problem, the whole situation. And the big system is not just the climate system. It's what we call the Earth. It's a complex dynamic system composed of the Earth system and also the anthroposphere. And the planet, it's a social ecological system of planetary dimensions, and nobody works at that level. Nobody thinks at that level. So they understand there are many problems, but the system's view of things is just completely beyond their understanding and their interest. I'm not saying they don't have what it takes to understand it. I'm saying that they've never heard of it, most of them, and they don't know what they don't know.
So we've talked about politics, and that's clearly just one part of the system.
Yes.
What I find striking in your work is how you make complex ideas understandable, not just through data or models, but through stories. When you write or give a talk, how do you find the right narrative to carry your message? And when did you realize that clarity alone isn't enough? That you also need a story to make people truly understand?
Coming up with a powerful narrative is the key to many things. You say, when I write an article or a chapter for a book, or when I give a talk, it's two different approaches, two different things. When I write an article or a chapter for a book, it's a very specific situation. It's the context is out of my hands most of the times. I just try to adapt to the specific requirements of what I have to produce for this specific book or the specific occasion. So it's not really meaningful. But when I give a talk, it's my decision. I prepare my talk and I choose how I do it entirely. And and it all comes back to what's the point? What's your when you do things like that? What's your objective? What I see is that most scientists, and experts, their objective is to share some knowledge and some insight and to make people understand. Okay, so that's it. That's your objective, to make people understand. Good. It's not going to be useful because almost everyone does not change profound things just by understanding the issues. Right? It just doesn't work. That doesn't move people. My goal is to make things happen, to trigger an awakening, to trigger some engagement, profound engagement, and change. And I want people to mobilize in a new way. So to do that, you need to work with emotions. You need to work with images. You need to work with mental projections. You need to. It's manifold. It has many different dimensions.
Some will resist emotion as a method. What evidence tells you it drives action better than data alone?
So most of my keynote speeches, they're not just basic keynote speeches. It's kind of a one man show. You know, there's a very strong emotional dimension to it, and that's what works with most people. But that's also what most scientists and experts dislike. So to them, I don't look too serious enough. That's another problem. For the serious people, I don't look serious enough because I'm like a clown on the stage, just making big noises and gestures. Yeah, because I try to touch people. I go for them. I go for the heart. I go for the guts, and not just for the brains. And that's what make I believe with many people. I can't say 100%, but with many people, that what makes this the way of I do things, the one that's what makes a difference, makes that a moment they won't forget. So to do that, it's a series of emotions that I try to trigger, and I conceive, I design my interventions as a series of emotional states I want to try to to bring people to. And the only question is, in what state of mind would they leave when I'm done? Because they won't remember everything, they won't have understood everything, but if they believe that it's very, very, very important that they just roll up their sleeves and take action and become a part of the change that we need, if they feel that they have to do it, well, then they'll find out. Then they will, research. They will watch another video of me or somebody else. They will read a book that has actually makes sense from a systemic point of view. Anyway, they'll start their own journey. Yeah, that's what happens. So narrative is and storytelling is what makes that possible. It's not about just knowledge and information and explaining things to people. That plays a part too, but it's not the main thing. That's why I use it, and that's why I've decided a long time ago. It was about 20 years ago that I needed also to master that, and that's why I learned script writing. That's why I learned comedy as well. That's why I've been on stage and I've done some theater and things like that. I've really wanted to develop that part because my aim has always been to have impact on people, not just to be interesting or inspiring.
Your white paper argues that SDGs treat symptoms in isolation. You say that when we start mapping those interconnections, we realize that system isn't complex, it's multidimensional. It is a fragmented map, and we are not sure how the different parts interact with each other dynamically. So it is more like a list, a list of wishes.
We say we would like there to be no more extreme poverty in the world. We would like people to would like to eradicate world hunger. We would like to have better education for people. And most of the SDGs are good in themselves in themselves. And I hope we can make things better. But to be honest, I doubt it. I believe that there are, SDGs which are going backwards already, which are regressing. Some others we've made big progress. I unfortunately believe that those progress are temporary because we never changed the system that caused the problems in the first place, and this system is very much active still, and it's going to end because it's not sustainable. But between now and the moment it actually ends, there's still a number of years, I guess, and in those years, it can make a lot of it can have a lot of bad impacts, additional bad impacts. Anyway, when you look at the different objectives, what you see is that we want to have cake and eat it. That's what we want to have. We want to have everything at the same time without realizing that some of these things are paradoxical. They can't go together. They're incompatible. So basically, you have SDG number 9 is about industrialization, and you have a target which is called, if I'm not mistaken, it's called sustainable industrialization. Now, how do you define that? How do you define sustainable industrialization? Really? Can any form of industrialization can be sustainable?
I suppose that without a clear definition of the word sustainable, its meaning might drift and is open to interpretation unless we establish a clear scope and timescale.
What does it mean sustainable? So we like to dream. We're dreamers. We take one notion that we like, another notion that we like or that we feel is important, and we join them together to form a new notion. But that's an abstraction. For example, green growth. We want growth, but it has to be green because we have ecological problems. Okay, well, then green growth. What does it mean? It has no meaning. There's no actual possibility to have a concrete an actual materialization in the real world of what green growth would mean. And ask people what green growth is. Most of them, they don't know. They have no idea because they don't know about the systemic issues that we face. So most of them, they believe that it's just about decoupling economic growth on the one hand and greenhouse gas emissions on the other hand. And that's it. It's just one-dimensional problem.
Well, what about SDG number 8, decent work and economic growth?
So first of all, decent work and economic growth have absolutely nothing to do together. Those are two very different things. Anyway, but if you look at the big picture, economic growth is considered as the if not one of the, but maybe the condition to make the whole world sustainable. It's presented in sustainable development as a condition because we need money, you understand? We need money to invest into technical or other solutions to solve the problem. So first of all, there's always this old habit of reasoning in terms of problems and solutions.
Yes, this takes us back to the same metaphor of different systems and so on.
Sustainable development doesn't make development sustainable, doesn't make the world sustainable. So it's not sustainable. If it's not sustainable, it's not going to last.
Right? When we break issues into isolated targets and indicators, what part of the real picture disappears and what risks stay hidden from view?
It's when you look at different aspects and it's fragmented, as you said, you don't have the big picture. It doesn't. It's like this old story, which is called the blind man and the elephant. There's it takes place a long time ago in India, and there's in a small village somewhere in India, and there are blind men living there. They've been blind all their lives, and they have not ever seen an elephant. And one day, some guy shows up in the village with an elephant, and it's their first opportunity to actually touch the animal and then start actually making an idea of what it's like, what an elephant looks like. So they touch the elephant, and there's one of the blind men who touches the flank of the elephant, and it's a big animal, so it's like, yeah, well, it's a flat surface. It kind of looks like a wall. And then there's a guy next to him which touches one of the legs. Says, no, it doesn't. It's not a wall. It looks like a tree and a trunk of a tree. And there's this other guy which holds the tail of the elephant. He says, no, it's like a cord. It has nothing to do with a tree or. And then there's the other one touching how do you say, the trunk of the elephant, and he says, no, it's like a snake.
Yes, I like this analogy very much. The experts hold part of the truth, but can see the whole picture. And like these blind men have no idea what the entire elephant looks like.
So anyway, that's the thing. And so the SDGs are not the right tool, and we have no other proper tool, by the way, apart from systems. I mean, we live in a dynamic system, and we believe we may understand what the stakes are, what the challenges are, and what the strategies are without system dynamics. System dynamics is the study of dynamic systems. So we live in dynamic systems, but we don't use system dynamics, and we believe that we can see any truth. It's nonsensical. Anyway, so the SDGs, among other frameworks, are not equipped to understand. And the problem is not just that they are not able to make us understand the issues. Indeed, to some extent, they blind us. They obscure what's at stake, the underlying dynamics. They do that because they make us believe that they are useful to understand the world. So it's, for example, just let me explain that. Saying we have a multidimensional problem, and we have many different experts working on different parts of it, is not enough, but still very important. And they all, all together, they have many different solutions to different sub issues of the main issue, the main dynamic. So okay, let's take that. It's better. And SDGs, pretty much, they do that. They tackle different issues.
Right. So they are to some extent helpful, but only as long as we don't mistake partial fixes for solutions.
If you pretend that it's a solution, if you use that word, then it stops being good. It starts being counterproductive. If you go see the doctor because you have your cancer, but you don't know that, and he just looks at the different symptoms. Well, if the guy gives you what you need to treat your headaches, good. If he knows what cream you need for your skin problems, good. He's your friend, right? If he helps you heal your digestive issues, very good. But if he tells you those are solutions, not good. Because then you leave, you go home, and you don't treat the cancer, and you die. He stops being your friend. The problem is about using the word solution wrongly. And by the way, we need people to wake the hell up now, because it's very serious. And how do you want people to wake up if you tell them, oh, the situation is very serious, but we have solutions?
So the moment we call it a solution, we give ourselves permission to stop thinking, right?
It just encloses us. It just puts us in a situation which is worse than all the possible situations, because we don't have solutions, but we believe we do. And that's the worst possible part. So the SDGs are you know, among other frameworks, just do that. They're useful, they're good. Okay, let's work on them, but let's stop pretending that they're solutions, but that because that makes things worse.
So, speaking of systemic risks, which tensions between goals and reality show how trying to fix one thing can end up making something else worse? And could you maybe share an example of how a change in one area ends up rippling through others?
So solving one problem aggravates another one. For example, yeah. Well, you have. I'm sorry, I do not have the reference here in mind, but we can maybe. I'll look it up, and we can maybe put it underneath the video or the audio. Yeah, in the notes. There's a study, scientific study that was published, which crosses the different options that we have to tackle climate change on the one hand, and biodiversity collapse on the other hand. And what we see is that there are a certain number, not all of them, of course, but a certain number of actions that we can take to mitigate climate change, which have negative impacts on biodiversity. The opposite is less true. Most solutions, let's say, that are recommended to tackle biodiversity issues are good for climate.
So, what would be an acceptable trade off?
To some extent, you will have to choose the lesser of two evils. Okay, so it's about making the right decisions, and that you don't make the right decisions, coherent ones, if you don't have a systemic view of things. Now, that's the first thing. The second thing is that how one thing can cascade in the system. Well, we will have in the future. We will have. When I say we, I don't necessarily mean everyone on Earth at the same time. It's not going to happen like this. So it's going to depend who you are, where you are, but it will eventually concern all of us, all humans, indeed. But later, in a few decades or generations. But in the, let's say, medium term, probably before 2040, and I would say it's obvious that it's going to be well before 2050, we're going to have energy issues. And it's not just about energy, it's about fuel. We're going to have fuel issues. And it's not, the question is not, is there oil and gas somewhere in the world? The question is there oil and gas where you live? Yeah. Does it arrive where you live? Do you have enough? How much does it cost? If you can't, if you don't have enough for everything, what do we renounce? What do we keep? Who makes that decision? Is that the market? Is that an elected official? Is that the people? Who makes that decision of what we have to sacrifice so that the most important things keep providing us with what we need for, to fulfill our basic needs. Anyway, so we it will have disruptions at that specific place in the system. The availability of fuel and maybe also of fertilizers and stuff like that, because it all depends on fossil fuels that most countries do not have. If that happens, all the whole society is gonna change. It's gonna have implications on the whole society, on the whole economy, then on the social systems, on peace and war and conflict. It'll have implications on the whole system. It will cascade throughout the whole system, probably worldwide. Maybe some places will be shielded from it for some time, but no. So yeah, that's one of the things. But there are many other things, maybe different dynamics. For example, climate change itself. Well before the end of this century, there are going to be societal disruptions just because of climate change.
Right. And these patterns are not limited to one country. The same dynamics show up everywhere as the system heats up. I read recently that by 2100, climate scientists are predicting 10 times as many heat waves as, as today.
Who cares? I'm not saying it's not true. It's probably true, but it's not because it's true that it's relevant. Who cares that 75 years from now, there's going to be 10 times more heat waves in France if we don't curb the climate change, the emissions? Who cares? Because it doesn't change our society. It's just going to be, crises that we're going to have to deal with. For people, it's just that. For people, they just don't realize that it's going to change the whole system. Because if we keep changing the climate at the pace, at the rate that we do, it's not just about heat waves. It's about trees dying. It's about most of the crops dying. It's about not being able to produce food. It's about societal disruptions and collapse. That's what it's about. So just doesn't make any sense to talk about just heat waves. Maybe it's true, but it's not the point. And if people don't understand that we're facing societal, I say disruption or collapse, at least decline, if we're lucky. If you don't talk about that, and let's face it, the most of the big reports and synthesis reports of the science do not dwell on that. Do not just talk about that, because there are not that many studies that conclude that we're facing societal collapse. Why? Because to do that, you need to have a study in system dynamics applied to at least the Earth system, and maybe the Earth system and the anthroposphere. And who does that? Very, very few people. It requires skills that we don't have, means that are very rare, and also funding, which is not to be found, is nowhere to be found for this kind of studies. So those studies are the most important ones. And those studies are underrepresented statistically. So they don't even find their way into the main conclusions and the main messages that are conveyed by the scientific community itself. So people don't know, don't understand the stakes, and the risks we're facing are not understood. Not even by our elected officials, and not even by the people who are specialized in risk. Most risk experts do not understand that because they're not systems thinker also. Yeah, that's
When we
complex.
talk about decisions, we cannot pretend that money is not shaping them. The people who have the most to lose financially are often the same ones funding the politicians who are supposed to make these decisions, which means anything that touches their privileges becomes almost impossible to move forward. It is part of the systemic problem, no question, but I think we have to leave this aside for
We
now.
have to leave that aside, but it's as I was saying just before, saying that heat waves are going to multiply is probably true, but it's not the right message to convey. I would also argue that the saying, as we hear all the time, that the poorer will be the first who are going to be impacted by climate change. Poorer people or poorer countries, probably in many times, not maybe not all the time, but in many times it's going to be true. But it's not relevant. I mean, it's not the. It is relevant. What I mean is, it's not the right message to convey if you want the system to change. Well, when I say system to change, I'm not saying a change of system. I'm saying the same system, but actual deep change anyway within the system, not just cosmetic change. If you want big decisions to be made, you have to convey the message, which is also true, that everyone will suffer from it, even the super wealthy. And that's what I believe they don't understand. They believe that they have the means to just pull through, to just make sure that they're okay. If something very, very bad happens where they are, now they'll go somewhere else because they have mobility. They can go anywhere in the world. So they have many options. plan B, plan C, plan D, plan E. So yeah, they'll be fine. No, they won't, because we are, and they don't understand that, and they don't understand the time frame. We are playing within the next 20 to 30 years, maybe. We are playing with the very habits, inhabitability of the planet Earth. That's what we're talking about. It's not going to be pleasant anywhere. Then societies may collapse. The global economy will stall and maybe collapse, because the global economy is based on growth. If it doesn't grow, it just collapses. I'm not the one saying it. Mainstream economists, neoclassical economists say it. We need growth, otherwise it's going to collapse. Well, but it can't grow forever. And we're not reaching the limits. We've actually passed the limits. We are in overshoot already, because there is a strong correlation between our capacity to make economic growth and flows of energy and raw materials. And very soon, within the next 15 years, 20 max, we're going to have big problems ensuring the availability of many materials and also of energy. So the economy will contract. There's going to be a big contraction of the economy. Well, that in a system which can only grow will mean that the social and economical systems of most societies will stop working, will probably collapse. And that the ultra wealthy, I don't know what they think. They think they can live their lives in luxury and have no problems if the societies they depend on collapse. Maybe they don't think they depend on societies. Maybe they think they can live, they do depend on societies for their own well being. Everyone will be impacted. And that, I believe, is the message we should convey, so that the rich, they realize that they are vulnerable too.
You have brought up collapse a few times, and I think we should stay with that for a moment. It is a loaded word, and I
Yeah.
cannot imagine you use it just to provoke. What is the reality you are pointing us toward when you use it? You also draw a line between crisis and collapse, and you link this to the great simplification you mentioned earlier. How did that distinction become clear to you? And was there a moment or a piece of work that opened that perspective for you, even if collapse is not the whole of what
Hmm.
you talk about?
Okay. So first of all, I do not want to be reduced to this idea of collapse. I talk about it because it's serious. It's not doom and gloom. It's not a. I'm not an activist, right? I'm a specialist, and societies and whole civilizations have collapsed already, and ours will collapse too. Now the question is when, how, why, but it will collapse. So people who say yeah, people who talk about collapse are just it's nonsensical. People think that it's bullshit. No, it's not bullshit. It's you need to understand that it's always been like this, and it's going to be like this for our society, our civilization too. Now, so I speak about collapse, but I don't speak. It's not my whole point. It's not my obsession. I also speak about community and territorial resilience, a very specific type of resilience, systemic resilience, which can avert collapse at least locally. At least locally. So it's not just about saying everything's going to collapse. It's about first how to prevent the main impacts. Some things will collapse, but some other things, more important actually, things may not if we do what we have to do in anticipation. Also, there are going to be crises. Yes, the collapse. It's not Mad Max, and it's not. I hope not in many places at least. It's not going to be that fast. It's going to take years and decades, but there are going to be tipping points. There are going to be moments where it's going to go wild, when we will have chaos and insecurity and conflict. Yeah, of course.
So a long, slow descent with some crisis, which will be intense and revealing.
A crisis never actually puts in question our model of society. It just hits our society. So anyway, so there are going to be the collapse. Let's say a big dynamic, a long dynamic, will be punctuated with many crises. The way you deal with the crises is that you try to find out solutions, and you do a risk prevention, and you do crisis management when it happens. And the idea is to go back to the normal, or something that as close as how it was before as possible, and you try to get back to that as quickly as possible. Yes, that's it. That's the
Well,
mindset, the general mindset. Sorry.
if collapse is not the same as crisis, then the governance system we trust to handle crisis might be deeply unfit for what is coming.
Exactly.
What do you think holds institutions and governments back from adopting a truly systemic approach? Is it a question of knowledge, of political will, or is there something deeper in the way our societies are organized? Maybe even locked into older dependencies that make change structurally difficult.
Yeah, it's all of that. It's all of that. There is political. I'm absolutely positive about that. There is political incompetency about these problems. And then also, even if the politicians were competent, and even if they wanted to do what has to be done, which will probably never happen, but even if, but then they could not do it because they have levers to change things within the system, not to make systemic change. And they can bring about big changes within the system. It's going to be still the same system, but organized differently. So it's our mindset. It's the way we learn things at school. Different subject matters, different categories of knowledge, different specialties, and it's the way it's presented in the media as well. One day you will talk about the climate, you will have one climate specialist. Another day you will
So, if the
invite
SDGs
on
show
on
how
your show someone
institutions
to
struggle
talk
with
about water,
systemic
or to talk
risks,
about this or
the
that, or pollution,
question
whatever.
becomes
And that's
wider.
it. It's just
In
silos and
my
silos and
conversation with
silos
Dan
upon
Davies,
silos.
who
But we
wrote
do
The
not have this
Unaccountability
systemic
Machine,
vision, and we are
we
not
touched on
organized like
how
this. For example,
systems often
you have
avoid real accountability, but
the
your work
states and
points to something
the
deeper,
countries and the
that we
regions.
also lack the
Most of
imagination
them,
and the
most of the time,
cultural
they're not
tools to
bioregions.
respond.
I encourage
That
people
is
to
where
take a look
I
at
would
this
like to
at this
go next.
concept, this notion of
You
bioregion
often say
and
that we need to
bioregionalism,
imagine
but
futures
meaning that
before we can build
they
them.
have no
Why do you think
they have
imagination has
no
become
link,
such a
direct link,
scarce
and
resource in
to the
politics
actual
and in
geographic
governance
and
today?
cultural differences, realities. So, for example, when I say that is people who live, for example, in France, you're in Switzerland. People who live in France near the Switzerland border, and people who live in Switzerland near the French border, they have more in common than that person who lives in France at that place and another French person who lives somewhere else in the country on the other side of the country. And it's the frontier. It doesn't mean anything about our cultural difference. There are obviously some differences if you belong to a country or another, but still, it's very superficial. It's artificial. So yeah, we would need to reorganize the world differently. We need to forget about all these abstract frontiers. We would need to reorganize differently the way we distribute the production of power, of energy, and also food. We would need to have governments which would be organized not in ministries with different categories and specialties, and which do not communicate with each other very often or very well, etc., etc. It's everywhere. It's cultural. It's psychological also, but I can't develop too much. It's in the way we learn about things, the way we categorize things. It's our reflexes, our intellectual reflexes, which are not proper to address the systemic challenges of our time. So yeah, political will is lacking. Well, that's for sure. But even if it was there, it wouldn't be enough.
Part 1 stops here, right at the question that hangs in the air. If our institutions can no longer imagine alternatives, what does that say about us, about our culture, about the stories we rely on to make sense of the world? Thank you for listening and for staying with us this far. In Part 2, the conversation opens up even more. We look at imagination itself, at ethics, degrowth, meaning, spirituality, and the ways people reorganize their lives when systems start to fail. Arthur takes us into the moral terrain of collapse, into the difference between seeing it as a technical scenario and seeing it as a horizon that forces us to think about responsibility and the cultural lenses we carry. I hope you will join us for this part 2 of my conversation with Arthur Keller.